I never planned on becoming the owner of a multi-million-dollar architecture firm, and I certainly never imagined I'd be sitting across from my ex-husband in a boardroom, watching the blood drain from his face as he realized who had just purchased the company he'd built his entire identity around. But life has a way of pushing you down paths you never expected to travel. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Rebecca Morgan. Well, it was. Now I go by Olivia Reed. And this is the story of how betrayal led me to reinvent myself in ways I never thought possible. It was our anniversary. 12 years of marriage, and I'd spent the afternoon preparing Mark's favorite meal, herb-crusted salmon with roasted vegetables, and that expensive Pinot Noir he always saved for special occasions. I'd even taken half a day off from my position as financial director at his company, Green Frame Designs. The sustainable architecture firm had been Mark's dream, but over the last 8 years, I'd poured just as much of myself into it as he had. The table was set, candles lit, music playing softly in the background when my phone buzzed. A text from Jessica, my closest friend since college. "We need to talk. It's about Mark. I'm so sorry." My stomach dropped. Jessica had been acting strange for months, canceling our weekly lunch dates, avoiding eye contact when we did meet. I'd chalked it up to her recent divorce, the stress of starting over. I never imagined she was carrying a secret that would shatter my world. I called her immediately. Her voice was shaking as she told me everything: the 6-month affair, the whispered promises, the Portland hotel where they met every Thursday afternoon while I was in my weekly executive meeting. The same meeting Mark had encouraged me to take on, insisting it would advance my career. "I'm ending it," Jessica said, her voice cracking. You deserve to know. I couldn't live with myself anymore." I hung up without responding. The salmon continued cooking in the oven as I sat motionless at our kitchen island, staring at the marble countertops we'd picked out together during the home renovation last spring. Everything in our life suddenly felt like a prop in some elaborate play. The house in West Hills with its view of Mount Hood, the his and hers Audis in the garage, the framed photo from our Tuscany trip on the credenza. When the garage door opened at 7:30, I was still sitting there, surrounded by the cooling dinner and half-burned candles. Mark walked in, raindrops clinging to his gray cashmere coat, a bottle of champagne in hand. "Happy anniversary, babe," he called out, his voice echoing through our open-concept living space. Then he saw my face. "What's wrong? Did something happen with the Carson project?" The Carson project, our biggest client to date, the contract that would either cement Green Frame's reputation as Portland's premier sustainable architecture firm or send us back to the drawing board. The project Mark had been working late on for months. "Jessica called me," I said simply, my voice steadier than I expected. His expression shifted so quickly I would have missed it if I hadn't been watching for it. The flash of panic, the calculation, the pivot to confusion. "Jessica? What did she want?" he asked, setting down the champagne with practiced casualness. "Don't," I whispered. "Just don't. She told me everything." What followed was so predictable it was almost disappointing. The denial, then the minimizing, then the blame. It was just physical. He'd been under so much stress. I had been distant. The firm had required so much attention. If I had been more available, if I had noticed his needs, I let him talk himself, in circles as I sat there, strangely detached, observing this man I'd spent over a decade with as though seeing him for the first time. This wasn't just about the affair. It was about the deliberate orchestration of my schedule to accommodate his infidelity. It was about the betrayal from the two people I trusted most. "I want you out tonight," I finally said, cutting off his monologue about how we could work through this. "You can stay at the loft downtown. I don't care, just go." "Becca, be reasonable," he said, his tone shifting to something harder. "You're emotional right now. We should discuss this when you've calmed down. Besides, you're overreacting. It was just—" "If you say it was just sex one more time, I swear to God, Mark," I interrupted. "And don't call me Becca. Not anymore." His expression changed again. This time to something I recognized all too well, the look he got when dealing with difficult clients. Placating, slightly condescending. "We need to be smart about this," he said, gesturing vaguely around our home. "There's the company to consider. The house. Our finances are completely intertwined. You're the financial director, for God's sake. You know we can't just unravel things overnight because you're upset." The company? Of course that would be his concern. Greenframe was his pride and joy, his identity. I was just— what? The supportive wife who handled the money? The convenient partner who helped secure investments with her approachable personality, as he'd once called it? I'd spent 8 years helping him build that company from a struggling startup to a regional success story, and now it was his shield. "I'll be at the office tomorrow," I said flatly. "We can maintain professional appearances until I figure out my next steps. But this marriage is over." He looked genuinely shocked, as though the possibility that his actions might have irrevocable consequences had never occurred to him. "You don't mean that," he said, reaching for my hand across the island. I pulled away, standing up. I've never meant anything more in my life. After he left, taking only an overnight bag and promises to fix this, I moved through our home like a ghost. I opened a different bottle of wine, not the anniversary Pinot, and walked from room to room, seeing years of memories play out like scenes from someone else's life. The framed architectural awards on the wall, the wedding photos I'd insisted on displaying despite Mark's protests that they were too traditional. The guest bedroom that was supposed to become a nursery before Mark decided children would complicate our lives too much right now. I slept in the guest room that night, unable to face our bed. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The next morning, I called in sick to work for the first time in 3 years, then spent hours researching divorce attorneys. By noon, I had an appointment scheduled with Eleanor Dawson, reputedly the most ruthless divorce lawyer in Portland. As the initial shock wore off, grief gave way to something else, a cold, clear anger that felt almost like liberation. If Mark thought I would be the distraught wife, easily manipulated during divorce proceedings to protect his precious company, he had catastrophically misunderstood who I'd become while helping him build his dream. Part 2. Discovery of Hidden Advantage. 2 days later, I sat in Eleanor Dawson's downtown office, surrounded by views of the Willamette River and the sleek, minimalist decor that matched her reputation for cutting through emotional clutter. "So," she said, after I'd outlined, "the situation, you want a divorce. What are your priorities? The house? Alimony? A quick, clean break?" I leaned forward. "I want what's fair. I've been the financial director of Greenframe for 8 years. I've helped secure investors, managed projects that turned the company around when it was struggling, and sacrificed my own career advancement to help build Mark's dream." Eleanor nodded, typing notes on her laptop. "That gives us several angles. Oregon is an equitable distribution state, so you're entitled to a fair portion of marital assets, including the value of the business that accumulated during the marriage." "There's something else," I said. "The Carson Project. It's a $40 million eco-resort development that would put Greenframe on the national map. Mark's been working on securing it for months, but here's what he doesn't know. I'm the one who built the relationship with James Carson. We serve on the same nonprofit board. The sustainability requirements in the contract were my suggestion, based on what I know about James's priorities." Eleanor stopped typing and looked up at me with renewed interest. "More importantly," I continued, "the final contract includes a key person clause. I added it after our last project fell apart when our lead designer quit midway. The clause specifies that both Mark as creative director and myself as financial director must remain involved for the duration of the project, or Carson has the right to renegotiate terms. A slow smile spread across Eleanor's face. So, if you leave, the biggest contract in the company's history could collapse, I finished. Or, at minimum, be open to renegotiation at a critical stage. That's significant leverage, Eleanor said. Have you spoken with Carson since the situation with your husband developed? I shook my head. Not yet. I wanted legal advice first. Smart, she approved. Now, tell me about the company structure. Who owns what percentage? Mark owns 51%. I own 22%. The remaining shares are split between two silent partners and a small pool for key employees, I explained. Eleanor made another note. And the company valuation? The last valuation put us at $3 million, but that was before the Carson contract. With that project secured, we're looking at a valuation closer to $15 million, maybe more. Do you want to stay with the company? Eleanor asked directly. The question caught me off guard. Did I? Greenframe had been as much a part of my identity as being Mark's wife. I'd been proud of what we'd built together, of the sustainable ethos we'd maintained even when it would have been easier to compromise. I don't know, I admitted. I can't imagine working with him after this. But I can't imagine walking away from 8 years of work either. You don't have to decide everything today, Eleanor assured me. But I want you to start documenting everything. Your contributions to the company, especially the Carson project. Any conversations with Mark about the business going forward, and don't, under any circumstances, quit or make impulsive decisions about your role. As I left Eleanor's office, my phone buzzed with a text from Tyler Rodriguez, our operations manager and the one person at Greenframe who had become a genuine friend rather than just a colleague. You okay? Mark's acting weird and saying you're down with food poisoning. Need anything? I hesitated before responding. Can you meet for coffee? Away from the office? Need someone I can trust. His response was immediate. Groundwork coffee in half an hour? Tyler was already at a corner table when I arrived, 2 cups steaming in front of him. His concerned expression deepened when he saw me. That bad, huh? He said as I sat down. Mark had an affair. With Jessica, I said without preamble. Tyler's expletive drew glances from nearby tables. Are you serious? That bastard and Jessica? You're Jessica? I'm so sorry, Becca. It's over, I said, wrapping my hands around the coffee cup. The marriage, I mean. I'm meeting with a lawyer, but I need to figure out what to do about the company. Tyler leaned back, processing. This explains why Mark called an emergency. Meeting with the executive team this morning. He said you might be taking some time off, and he'd be temporarily reassigning your responsibilities. A chill ran through me. He's trying to edge me out. Looks that way, Tyler agreed. But here's something he doesn't know. Carson called this morning, asking specifically for you. There's an issue with the financing structure for the second phase, and he said, and I quote, I only want to discuss this with Rebecca. She's the only one who understands what we're trying to accomplish here. I felt a surge of something that wasn't quite satisfaction, more like confirmation. Did you tell Mark? I told him Carson called. I didn't mention he asked for you specifically. Tyler took a sip of his coffee, watching me carefully. Look, I don't want to get in the middle of whatever's happening between you two, but you should know the team relies on you more than Mark realizes. He's the vision guy, sure, but you're the one who makes things happen. As we continued talking, Tyler revealed more. Mark had been meeting with potential replacement CFOs for months, claiming it was about expanding the executive team. He'd been systematically removing me from client communications whenever possible, and most significantly, he'd begun discussions with a larger firm about a potential acquisition, discussions I should have been privy to as financial director, but had been deliberately excluded from. Why are you telling me all this? I asked finally. Tyler looked uncomfortable. Because it's not right, and because, well, if you're planning to fight for your place in the company, you should know what you're up against. By the time I returned home, my shock had hardened into resolve. Mark wasn't just betraying me personally, he'd been systematically undermining me professionally for months. The affair was just the most intimate manifestation of a broader pattern of deception. I spent the night researching everything I could about Greenframe's financial position, our outstanding projects, and most importantly, our vulnerabilities. As the financial director, I had access to information Mark likely assumed I'd never use against him. By morning, I had a clearer picture of both my leverage and my goals. When Mark called the next day, his voice was cautious. "We need to talk about how we're handling this at the office." "I'll be in tomorrow," I said calmly. "We can maintain professional appearances," as I said. "And the Carson project?" he asked, the real concern evident in his voice. "Don't worry," I replied, a new coolness in my tone. "I won't sabotage the business we built." "But we should be clear about something, Mark. You didn't build Greenframe alone, and you won't rebuild your life alone either." The silence on the other end told me he was finally beginning to understand what he was really facing. Part 3. Strategic. Re-engagement. The Greenframe office occupied the top floor of a renovated warehouse in Portland's Pearl District. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city, and living plant walls created natural dividers between work areas, all Mark's design, of course. As I stepped off the elevator the following Monday, conversations hushed, and heads turned quickly back to computer screens. News had spread. Of course it had. My office was a glass-enclosed space adjacent to Mark's, our areas connected by a shared conference room, a physical manifestation of our supposed partnership. I walked directly there, ignoring the stairs, and found an unexpected visitor waiting. James Carson himself, tall and imposing in his signature eco-conscious designer suit. "Rebecca," he said warmly, rising to greet me. "I hope you don't mind my dropping by unannounced. Your husband seemed quite surprised to see me." I managed a genuine smile. "It's always good to see you, James. What brings you here?" "Concern, primarily," he said, his expression growing serious. "There are rumors of significant changes at Greenframe. As someone who's committed $40 million to your vision, I wanted to hear directly from both of you what's happening." Before I could respond, Mark appeared in the doorway, his practiced client smile firmly in place. "James, I see you found Rebecca. Shall we move to the conference room where we can all talk comfortably?" The tension in the conference room was palpable. As we took our seats, the panoramic view of Mount Hood providing a deceptively serene backdrop. "Let me be direct," James said once we'd settled. "I've heard you two are having personal difficulties that might impact the company. My concern is whether these changes will affect our project." Mark jumped in quickly. "James, I can assure you that any personal matters between Rebecca and myself won't affect Greenframe's commitment or capacity to deliver exceptional work on the Carson project." James nodded, then turned to me. "And you, Rebecca? What's your perspective?" I took a measured breath. "James, you know that I've always believed in total transparency with our clients. Yes, Mark and I are separating. That's a personal matter. But professionally, there are some things you should be aware of." Mark's posture stiffened. "The key person clause in our contract was created to protect both your interests and the integrity of the project," I continued. "I remain fully committed to seeing the Carson project succeed, but I think we should discuss what my continued involvement will look like." James leaned forward, interested. "What are you proposing?" "I'd like to establish an independent oversight role for the financials of this project," I said, watching Mark's expression darken. "I would report directly to you on budget adherence, sustainability benchmarks, and financial projections, separate from my role at Greenframe." "That sounds like a conflict of interest," Mark interjected sharply. "Actually," James said thoughtfully. It sounds like a solution to a potential conflict of interest. I've always appreciated your financial rigor, Rebecca. If you're willing to provide that kind of transparency, I'm all for it. Mark forced a smile. Of course, we can discuss the details. I think Rebecca and I can work out those details, James interrupted smoothly. After all, she's the one who understood my vision from the beginning. After James left, Mark closed the conference room door with controlled precision. What the hell was that? He demanded. Are you trying to destroy everything we've built? No, Mark, I said calmly. I'm trying to salvage what I can from the wreckage you created. Not just with the affair, but with your attempts to push me out of the company for months. His expression flickered with surprise before he recovered. That's absurd. Is it? The secret meetings about acquisition? The interviews with potential CFOs to replace me? Removing me from client communications? I leaned forward. Did you really think Tyler wouldn't tell me? A muscle twitched in his jaw. Tyler needs to remember who signs his checks. Threats now? That's low. Even for you. I stood up, gathering my notebook. Let me be clear about something. I have no intention of sabotaging Greenframe, but I won't be pushed out of what I helped build either. So we have two options. We can find a way to work together professionally while our divorce proceeds, or you can buy me out at a price that reflects my actual contribution, not just my ownership percentage. You're overplaying your hand, Becca, he said, his voice dropping to that dangerous quiet I'd heard rarely over our years together. I started this company. My name is on the door. My reputation brings in the clients. And my work keeps them, I countered. Ask yourself why James Carson insisted on speaking with me about the financial structures. It's not because of your charming personality. I left him standing there, hands gripping the back of a chair so hard his knuckles whitened. It was the first time in our marriage I'd ever walked away from him having the last word. Over the next few weeks, a strange new equilibrium developed at Greenframe. Mark and I maintained rigid professionalism, communicating primarily through email and in-group settings. The staff walked on eggshells around us both, though I noticed certain team members, particularly those who joined because of the company's sustainability mission rather than Mark's reputation, made points of engaging with me directly. My separate arrangement with the Carson Project gave me a measure of protection Mark hadn't anticipated. James made it clear to everyone that my continued involvement was non-negotiable, effectively blocking Mark's efforts to sideline me. But I knew this situation wasn't sustainable. Every day brought fresh reminders of betrayal, not just Mark's affair with Jessica, but the systematic way he'd planned to remove me from the company I'd helped build. I needed a more permanent solution. The answer came from an unexpected source. One evening, as I was preparing to leave the office, my phone rang with an unknown number. "Is this Rebecca Morgan?" a woman's voice asked when I answered. "Yes, who's this?" "My name is Victoria Hayes. I'm a managing partner at Meridian Capital. We specialize in strategic investments in sustainable industries. I'd like to discuss a potential opportunity with you, if you have a moment." I sank back into my chair. Meridian Capital was one of the largest investment firms on the West Coast, known for its long-term approach and commitment to environmental sustainability. I'm listening," I said carefully. "I'll be direct, Ms. Morgan. We've been watching Greenframe for some time. Your work on integrating financial viability with genuine sustainability metrics is impressive. The Carson Project in particular represents exactly the kind of innovation we believe has significant growth potential." "Thank you," I said, still cautious. "But I'm curious why you're calling me and not Mark Mitchell, the majority owner." There was a slight pause. "We're aware of the current situation at Greenframe. Our interest is specifically in your approach to sustainable finance. We'd like to discuss possibilities that might benefit all parties, including yourself." By the end of the call, I had agreed to meet Victoria for dinner the following evening at a discreet restaurant in a neighboring town. As I hung up, my mind raced with possibilities I hadn't dared consider before. That night, for the first time since discovering Mark's betrayal, I didn't cry myself to sleep. Instead, I stayed up late researching Meridian Capital, Victoria Hayes, and most importantly, contemplating a future I was only beginning to envision. Part 4. Persistent Challenges. The restaurant Victoria had chosen was elegant but understated, tucked away in a converted Victorian house in a quiet neighborhood. She was already seated when I arrived, a slim woman in her 50s with a sleek silver bob and the kind of confidence that comes from decades of navigating male-dominated spaces successfully. "Rebecca," she greeted me, standing to shake my hand. "Thank you for meeting me on such short notice." Once we'd ordered, she got straight to the point. "Our firm has been following sustainable architecture trends for several years. Greenframe consistently appears in our analyses as an undervalued company with significant growth potential, particularly in the integration of financial and environmental sustainability. That's been my focus," I acknowledged, "finding the intersection where environmental responsibility becomes a financial advantage rather than just a moral choice." Victoria nodded approvingly. "Exactly why I wanted to speak with you. We understand your position at Greenframe has become complicated. We'd like to offer an alternative." "I'm listening," I said, keeping my expression neutral despite the hope flaring inside me. "Meridian would like to back you in creating a new venture. Your expertise, our capital, a firm built from the ground up around your sustainable finance principles, with none of the baggage of your current situation." The offer was breathtaking in its simplicity and audacity. A clean break, a fresh start. Everything I'd been unable to envision for myself suddenly laid out as a concrete possibility. "It's an incredible offer," I said carefully, "but I have obligations at Greenframe. The Carson Project would be welcome to migrate to your new venture if that's what Carson wants," Victoria finished smoothly. "We've done our homework, Rebecca. The key person clause gives you significant leverage. If you leave, Carson has every right to reconsider his options." I took a sip of water, mind racing. "You're essentially proposing that I walk away from Greenframe and take its biggest client with me." Victoria shrugged elegantly. "I'm proposing that you recognize your own value and create something that can't be taken from you. What clients choose to do is their decision." By the time dinner concluded, I had neither accepted nor rejected Victoria's offer. But I had a business plan template, a proposed funding structure, and a card with her private number. "Take some time," she had said as we parted, "but not too much. Opportunities like this don't wait forever." The next morning, I arrived at the office to find an email from Mark, copying the entire executive team. "Executive Strategy Meeting, 10 a.m., attendance mandatory." When I entered the conference room, the tension was immediately palpable. Mark sat at the head of the table, flanked by two men I didn't recognize. Our executive team filled the remaining seats, Tyler catching my eye briefly with a warning look. "Now that we're all here," Mark began without preamble, "I want to introduce Richard Dawson and Stephen Wells from Arcadia Partners. They're here to discuss a potential strategic partnership that would take Greenframe to the next level." I kept my face carefully neutral as I took my seat. Arcadia Partners was a major development firm known for luxury properties with superficial, green elements. Exactly the kind of greenwashing Greenframe had always positioned itself against. "As you know," Mark continued, "we've reached a point where scaling requires significant capital investment. Arcadia has proposed an acquisition deal that would provide that capital while maintaining our creative independence. The presentation that followed outlined a deal that would effectively absorb Greenframe into Arcadia's corporate structure. Mark would remain as creative director, but financial control would transfer entirely to Arcadia. There was no mention of my role in the restructured company. When the Arcadia representatives finished their pitch and left to give the team time to discuss, Mark finally acknowledged me directly. Rebecca, as financial director, I'm sure you have questions about the numbers. Several, I said evenly. Starting with why this is the first time I'm hearing about a deal that would fundamentally alter the company I partly own, and continuing with how this aligns with our sustainability mission, given Arcadia's reputation. A tense silence fell over the room. Your personal situation has made certain discussions difficult, Mark replied carefully. As for the mission, Arcadia has committed to adopting our sustainability standards. On paper, I countered, their actual projects tell a different story. But more importantly, this acquisition would require approval from all shareholders, including me. Is that part of your strategy, or were you planning to present me with a fait accompli? Mark's jaw tightened. Your 22% isn't enough to block the deal if all other shareholders approve. True, I acknowledged. But what about the Carson contract? Have you discussed with Arcadia how James will react to this news? His key person clause specifically names me, not just Greenframe. A flicker of uncertainty crossed Mark's face. James understands business necessities. Does he? Why don't we call him right now and find out? The meeting deteriorated rapidly. After that, by the time it ended, the executive team had split into factions. Those aligned with Mark's vision of corporate expansion and those concerned about compromising our sustainability principles. As I returned to my office, Tyler followed, closing the door behind him. That was brutal, he said quietly, but necessary. He's been planning this for months, working the other shareholders individually. The silent partners are already on board. Of course they are, I said bitterly. They care about returns, not principles. Tyler hesitated. There's more. Mark's been documenting performance issues in your file, building a case for removing you as financial director for cause. He can't force you to sell your shares, but he can try to strip you of your position. The revelation should have hurt, but instead, it crystallized something for me. Thank you for telling me. I need to make some calls. After Tyler left, I called Eleanor Dawson first, updating her on both Arcadia's offer and Victoria's proposal. Then I called James Carson, requesting an urgent meeting away from the Greenframe offices. Finally, I called Victoria Hayes. I'm interested, I told her simply, but I want to discuss a different approach. Over the next 2 weeks, I documented everything. Every email, every meeting minute, every financial projection that demonstrated how the Arcadia deal would compromise our sustainability commitments. I compiled a portfolio of my contributions to Greenframe, client relationships I'd cultivated, financing structures I'd developed, sustainability metrics I'd created that had become core to our brand identity. Simultaneously, I worked with Victoria and her team on an alternative vision, one that would preserve what mattered about Greenframe while creating something new. Meanwhile, Mark accelerated his attempts to undermine me. Projects were reassigned without my knowledge. I was excluded from client meetings. Documents I needed mysteriously became unavailable. Once, I found my computer had been accessed overnight. Financial models altered in ways that would have caused significant errors had I not caught them. The hostility was no longer hidden. Mark operated with the confidence of someone who believed victory was inevitable. He had the majority share, the support of the silent partners, and a deal with Arcadia that would make him wealthy regardless of what happened to Greenframe's soul. What he didn't know was that I'd stopped playing his game entirely. I wasn't fighting to keep my position at Greenframe anymore. I was planning something much more substantive. The breaking point came when I discovered Mark had scheduled a final signing meeting with Arcadia without informing me. I learned about it only because the paralegal preparing the documents mistakenly copied me on an email. That evening, I called Victoria Hayes. It's time, I said. Are you still interested in my alternative proposal? More than ever, she replied. The paperwork is ready whenever you are. 3 days later, I submitted my resignation from Greenframe effective immediately. Mark's response was immediate, a message that managed to be both threatening and dismissive. Your timing is noted. We'll discuss your shares during the divorce proceedings. He thought he'd won, that I'd broken under the pressure and run away, leaving him free to complete the Arcadia deal without opposition. He had no idea what was actually happening. Part 5. Transformation and New Beginning. 6 months passed. I disappeared from Portland's professional circles completely. No LinkedIn updates, no industry events, no contact with former colleagues except for Tyler, who had also left Greenframe shortly after I did. The divorce proceedings continued through attorneys, with Mark apparently confident that my departure from the company had weakened my negotiating position. During those months, I reinvented myself completely. I legally changed my name from Rebecca Morgan to Olivia Reed, my grandmother's name, a woman who had rebuilt her life after being widowed at 38. I moved to Seattle, where Victoria introduced me to her network of sustainable investment professionals. And I worked tirelessly on creating something that would honor the original vision of Greenframe while transcending it completely. Meanwhile, Greenframe was struggling. Without me to manage the Carson project, James had invoked the key person clause and put the contract on hold, creating a cash flow crisis. The Arcadia deal had fallen apart when a journalist, acting on an anonymous tip, published a scathing exposé on how the acquisition would dilute Greenframe's sustainability commitments. Several key team members had resigned, following Tyler's bid. Then came the opportunity we'd been waiting for. One of Greenframe's silent partners, facing liquidity issues in another business, decided to sell his 15% stake. Within 24 hours, Meridian Capital had purchased it through a shell company, with no connection to me visible to casual observers. Over the next 2 months, we acquired the other silent partner's 12% in a similar fashion. Combined with specialized investment vehicles Victoria had created, we now controlled 27% of Greenframe, still less than Mark's 51%, but enough to have a significant voice. That's when the final phase began. Using Meridian's connections, we approached Greenframe's largest clients with a new proposition, a firm called Horizon Innovations, built around truly integrated sustainability principles, led by a team that included several former Greenframe employees, with Olivia Reed as CEO. The client exodus was swift and devastating. Within weeks, Greenframe lost 40% of its project pipeline. The company's cash reserves, already depleted by the Carson situation, dwindled to critical levels. Mark was forced to lay off staff and downsize office space just to keep the lights on. Finally, when Greenframe's valuation had dropped to its lowest point in 5 years, Meridian Capital made its move. A direct offer to purchase the company, outright at a price that, while fair given the circumstances, was a fraction of what it had been worth when I left. Mark rejected it outright, of course. Then came the second offer, this one from Horizon Innovations, my company. The terms were nearly identical, but with one crucial difference. I would personally come to the meeting to discuss the details, which is how I found myself sitting across from Mark in a sterile conference room at his lawyer's office, watching comprehension dawn on his face as he realized exactly who Olivia Reed was. "Rebecca," he whispered, the color draining from his face. "Olivia," I corrected gently. "Olivia Reed." "It's been a while, Mark." His shock quickly morphed to anger. You can't. It's some kind of fraud." "Not at all," Victoria said smoothly from beside me. "Meridian Capital and Horizon Innovations have made a legitimate offer for a struggling company. Ms. Reed's previous connection to Greenframe was, of course, disclosed in all our legal documentation. Perhaps you should have read the fine print more carefully." The irony wasn't lost on either of us. Mark, who had planned to push me out of my own company, now faced being bought out by the very person he'd underestimated. "Why are you doing this?" he asked finally. "Revenge?" I shook my head. "Not revenge, reclamation. You took something I helped build and tried to strip it of its values, both the company and our marriage. I'm simply creating something better from the ashes." In the end, he had no choice but to accept our offer. His majority share was worth nothing if the company collapsed entirely, which it would have within months without an infusion of capital and clients. The acquisition was finalized on a Tuesday morning. By afternoon, I walked into Greenframe's downsized office, now a Horizon Innovations property, and addressed the remaining staff. Many were people I'd worked with for years, their faces showing mixtures of shock, confusion, and, from some, a glimmer of hope. "Some of you know me as Rebecca Morgan," I began. "Today, I'm Olivia Reed, CEO of Horizon Innovations. I know you've been through upheaval and uncertainty. That ends now." Horizon is committed to genuine sustainability, financial integrity, and valuing the people who make our vision possible. In the months that followed, we rebuilt. We rehired key people who had left. We reestablished client relationships based on trust and genuine sustainability principles rather than flashy promises. Most importantly, we created a company culture that valued integrity above all else, the very thing that had been missing in my marriage and in Mark's leadership. James Carson was one of the first to sign with Horizon, bringing his eco-resort project back to life with renewed enthusiasm. "This is what I wanted all along," he told me during our contract signing. "A partner who understands that sustainability isn't just a marketing angle. It's a fundamental approach to business and life." The divorce was finalized around the same time as the company acquisition. In the end, Mark walked away with far less than he would have if he'd simply been honest from the beginning, both emotionally and financially. I heard through mutual connections that he left Portland altogether, taking a position with a conventional architecture firm in Chicago. Jessica, too, had moved away, our friendship unsalvageable despite her eventual remorse. As for me, Olivia Reed became more than just a legal name change. She became a version of myself I hadn't known existed, more confident, more strategic, less concerned with pleasing others at the expense of my own values. The woman who had spent years supporting someone else's vision was now leading her own, and doing it more successfully than Mark ever had. One evening, about a year after the acquisition, I was working late in my office. The same glass-enclosed space that had once been Mark's, now redesigned with warm woods and living plants to reflect my own aesthetic. Tyler knocked on the door. Frame, a bottle of champagne and 2 glasses in hand. "I thought we should mark the occasion," he said, stepping inside. "The Carson Project just won the National Sustainability Award. First time a Pacific Northwest firm has taken the top honor in a decade." I smiled, genuinely pleased but not surprised. We had poured everything into making that project a showcase of what was possible when financial and environmental sustainability were truly integrated. "We should celebrate with the whole team tomorrow," I said, but gestured for him to sit anyway. Some victories deserved acknowledgement in the moment. As Tyler poured the champagne, he studied me with a thoughtful expression. "You know, when you first told me about Mark and Jessica, I thought you'd be destroyed. Most people would have been." I accepted the glass he offered. I almost was. For about 48 hours. What changed? I considered the question carefully. I realized something fundamental. Mark betrayed me because, at some level, he never really saw me. Not fully. He saw the supportive wife, the competent financial director, the pleasant dinner companion. But he never saw me as someone with dreams and capabilities that might equal or exceed his own. Tyler nodded slowly. His mistake. His loss, I corrected gently. But also my wake-up call. I'd spent so many years helping him build his dream that I'd forgotten to nurture my own. We clinked glasses and sipped in comfortable silence, looking out at the Portland skyline now bathed in evening light. The city looked different from this perspective, Not just because we'd moved offices to a higher floor in a more central building, but because I was viewing it through new eyes. "Have you ever regretted it?" Tyler asked after a while. "Not the company part, that was brilliant. But changing your name, reinventing yourself so completely, walking away from being Rebecca." The question gave me pause. Had I regretted it? There had been moments of disorientation, certainly. Times when someone called Olivia, and I took an extra second to respond. Moments when I caught a glimpse of myself in a mirror and still felt a flicker of surprise at the woman looking back. Hair now worn in a sleek bob, instead of the long waves Mark had preferred. Wardrobe evolved from safe neutrals to bold colors and clean lines that better expressed my aesthetic sensibilities. "No," I said finally. Rebecca was someone who defined herself in relation to others. Mark's wife, Greenframe's financial director, Jessica's friend. Olivia is defined by her own vision, her own values. "That's surprisingly philosophical," Tyler remarked with a small smile. I laughed. "Maybe, but it's also practical. When you've been betrayed on the scale I was, personally and professionally, by the people closest to you, continuing as the same person feels impossible. The name change gave me permission to keep the parts of myself I valued and discard the rest." Tyler raised his glass again. "To Olivia Reed, then, and to new beginnings." I echoed his toast, but my mind was already drifting to the future. Horizon's success had exceeded even Victoria's optimistic projections. We'd grown from a team of 15 former Greenframe employees to a staff of 48, with satellite offices opening soon in Seattle and Denver. The acquisition of Greenframe had given us an established portfolio to build from, but our newest projects were pushing boundaries that Mark had always deemed too risky or idealistic. The following morning, I arrived at the office earlier than usual, energy buzzing through me after another night of minimal sleep. Since the divorce, insomnia had become my occasional companion, not from stress or grief as it had been in those first raw weeks, but from an excess of ideas and possibilities that sometimes refused to quiet themselves even in darkness. I was reviewing plans for our newest project, a zero-carbon community development in a formerly industrial area, when Victoria called. "Have you seen the business section today?" she asked without preamble. "Not yet. Should I be concerned?" Quite. The opposite. Northwest Business Journal did a feature on the region's fastest-growing sustainable companies. Horizon tops the list. They're calling you, and I quote, "the visionary leader redefining what sustainability means in the built environment." I felt a complex wave of emotions, pride, certainly, but also a strange sense of vindication. Any mention of Greenframe or Mark? A brief reference to Horizon's acquisition of struggling local firm Greenframe Designs. Nothing about its former leadership. Victoria's tone was satisfyingly neutral, but I could hear the subtle approval beneath it. They're focusing on the future, not the past. As they should. After we hung up, I sat with that thought for a while. The future, not the past. When I'd begun this journey of reinvention, part of me, a part I wasn't particularly proud of, had been driven by the desire to prove Mark wrong, to show him and everyone else what I was capable of when not standing, in his shadow. But somewhere along the way, that motivation had faded, replaced by something far more sustaining, the genuine excitement of creating something aligned with my deepest values. The acquisition of Greenframe had been strategic, yes, but also symbolic. A reclaiming of work I'd invested in, principles I believed in. Now that it was complete, integrated into Horizon's broader vision, I found myself thinking about Mark less and less. The business world loves narratives of revenge and vindication. The spurned employee who becomes a successful competitor, the rejected entrepreneur who builds a billion-dollar company. But those narratives miss something crucial. True success isn't about proving others wrong. It's about proving yourself right. Tyler appeared in my doorway, interrupting my reflections. Executive team is gathering for the pre-award celebration. You coming? I smiled, closing my laptop. Lead the way. Our conference room, a warm, light-filled space deliberately designed to facilitate collaboration rather than hierarchy, was already filled with the sounds of conversation and laughter when we arrived. The core team that had followed me from Greenframe had expanded, joined by new talent drawn to Horizon's reputation for innovation and integrity. As conversations quieted and attention turned to me, I felt a momentary flash of déjà vu, standing before a team at a crucial moment, just as I had a year ago when walking into Greenframe's offices as its new owner. But this time, the faces looking back at me held no confusion or apprehension, only shared purpose and earned trust. Before we celebrate the Carson Project Award, I began, I want to acknowledge something important. This recognition isn't just for a building, impressive as it is with its regenerative energy systems and carbon-sequestering materials. It's for a philosophy that each of you has helped shape and strengthen. I looked around the room, meeting eyes with the veterans who'd weathered Greenframe's collapse alongside me, and the newcomers who'd joined our vision since. A year ago, many of us were in very different places. Some were watching a company they cared about lose its way. Others were looking for work that aligned with their values and finding few options. I was reinventing myself entirely. Light laughter rippled through the room at that understatement. What brings us together now isn't just the work, though the work matters deeply. It's the shared understanding that how we build is as important as what we build. That integrity isn't a marketing term but a daily practice. And that true sustainability encompasses not just environmental considerations, but human ones as well. How we treat each other, our clients, and ourselves. Eleanor Dawson, who had transitioned from my divorce attorney to Horizon's chief legal counsel, raised her glass. To the Carson Award, and to the leader who made it possible. As glasses clinked and conversations resumed, I stepped back, taking in the scene with a quiet sense of fulfillment. This was what success felt like, not the triumph over an ex-husband or the acquisition of a company, but the creation of something with meaning and purpose, surrounded by people who shared that vision. Later that afternoon, I had a meeting scheduled with a potential new client, a developer known for luxury properties who claimed to be interested in exploring more sustainable approaches. As I prepared for the conversation, reviewing their portfolio and previous projects, my assistant knocked on my door. "There's a Jessica Palmer here to see you," she said, her tone carefully neutral. "She doesn't have an appointment." I felt a jolt of surprise, followed by a complex tangle of emotions I couldn't immediately sort through. Jessica, my former closest friend. The woman who had been having an affair with my husband while helping me plan our anniversary dinner. We hadn't spoken since that devastating phone call over a year ago. "How does she look?" I asked, buying myself a moment to think. My assistant hesitated. "Nervous. She said she understands if you don't want to see her, but she'd appreciate 5 minutes." I took a deep breath, considering my options. The old Rebecca might have avoided conflict, might have sent Jessica away to preserve a fragile peace. But Olivia Reed had learned that avoidance solved nothing. Send her in, I decided, and push my next meeting back 15 minutes, just in case. Jessica entered cautiously, stopping just inside the doorway as though uncertain of her welcome. She looked different, hair shorter, face thinner, designer clothes replaced by something simpler and less calculated. The confident woman who had been my shopping companion and dinner guest for years seemed diminished somehow. "Rebecca," she began, then caught herself. "I mean Olivia. Thank you for seeing me." I gestured to the chairs across from my desk. "Have a seat. Why are you here, Jessica?" She sat, hands clasped tightly in her lap. I've been in therapy, she said, the words coming out in a rush. For months now, working through everything. My choices, the people I hurt, why I did what I did. I kept my expression neutral, waiting. I'm not here to ask forgiveness, she continued. I don't deserve that, and I know it. I'm here because my therapist suggested that part of recovery is taking responsibility, not just privately, but to the people you've harmed. And you've harmed me, I said, the understatement hanging between us. Jessica nodded, eyes lowering. Briefly. More than I understood at the time. I told myself it was just about Mark, that our friendship was separate somehow. I compartmentalized. It was. There's no excuse. Despite everything, I felt a flicker of curiosity. Why did you tell me? That night before our anniversary. You could have just ended things with him quietly. I might never have known. She looked up, surprise evident on her face. I've thought about that constantly. Why I chose that particular moment to confess. She paused. I think I wanted to be stopped. Not consciously, but some part of me was desperate for consequences. For someone to say, this is wrong, and make it end. And I was that someone, I observed, a new understanding dawning. Not Mark, who was perfectly content to continue betraying his wife, but me, the person who would hold you both accountable. Yes, she admitted quietly. It was cowardly, using you to force an end I couldn't manage myself. We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of our shared history filling the space between us. I saw the article about Horizon, Jessica said finally. The award, your success. I'm genuinely happy for you, Olivia. Thank you, I said. Simply. Mark is engaged again, she offered, watching me carefully for a reaction. To someone at his new firm in Chicago. I thought you should hear it from... Well, not from social media. I absorbed this information, searching for the pain or jealousy such news might once have triggered. Instead, I felt only a distant pity for the woman who didn't yet know what I had learned the hard way. I hope she has better boundaries than... We did, I said finally. Jessica nodded, standing to leave. I should go. Thank you for seeing me, for hearing me out. I rose as well. Jessica. She paused, hand on the door. I appreciate you coming, taking responsibility. It matters. Her eyes filled with tears, but she blinked them back. Does it help at all? Knowing it wasn't just you, that I've been? Grappling with it too? I considered the question carefully. Did it help to know that Jessica had suffered consequences as well? That she'd been examining her choices, seeking to understand her own complicity? Yes, I said truthfully. Not because I want you to suffer, but because it means what happened wasn't meaningless. That we're both learning from it, becoming different people because of it. After she left, I stood at my office window, looking out at the city spread below. Portland in spring was a riot of green, cherry blossoms and new leaves softening the urban landscape. From this vantage point, I could just make out Greenframe's original offices in the Pearl District, now occupied by a tech startup, the living walls still visible through the windows, but our logo long since removed. Jessica's visit had stirred memories I'd carefully contained during the intense focus of building Horizon. The pain of that night, the disorientation of realizing two people I'd trusted completely, had betrayed me in the most intimate way possible. The long nights questioning every moment of my marriage, wondering what signs I'd missed, what parts of myself I'd suppressed to make room for Mark's ego and ambitions. But along with those difficult memories came a recognition of how far I'd traveled since then. Not just professionally, with Horizon's success and growing influence, but personally, in my understanding of myself, my values, my capacity for reinvention. My assistant's voice came through the intercom, pulling me back to the present. Your 3 o'clock is here, Send them in, I replied, turning from the window and the past it had momentarily recalled. The potential client who entered, Evan Blackwell of Blackwell Properties, exuded the particular confidence of the very wealthy. Expensive suit, perfect haircut, the practiced smile of someone accustomed to getting what he wants. I recognized the type immediately. I'd been married to a less wealthy version of the same man. Ms. Reed, he greeted me, extending his hand. A pleasure to finally meet. Your reputation precedes you. I shook his hand firmly. Likewise, Mr. Blackwell. I've reviewed your portfolio. Impressive scale. Very distinctive aesthetic. He settled into the chair I indicated, glancing around my office with barely concealed assessment. Your firm has made quite the splash in a relatively short time. The Carson project in particular has our attention. Those carbon metrics are ambitious. Not ambitious, I corrected. Necessary, given what we know about climate impacts. And achievable, as the project demonstrates. Blackwell smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Yes, well, we're interested in incorporating more sustainable elements into our lakeside development. Not the full Carson treatment, obviously. Our market expects certain luxuries, but enough to qualify for the tax incentives and improve our corporate responsibility profile. And there it was, the real agenda. Not genuine sustainability, but the appearance of it. Green enough for marketing materials and regulatory benefits, but not so green as to challenge their clients' expectations of unlimited consumption. The old Rebecca might have nodded along, trying to find middle ground, eager to secure a prestigious client even at the cost of compromise. But Olivia Reed had different standards. I appreciate your interest, Mr. Blackwell, but I think we may not be the right firm for your needs. His eyebrows rose in genuine surprise. I beg your pardon? Horizon doesn't do sustainability as an add-on feature or a marketing angle, I explained calmly. Our approach is comprehensive or nothing. We believe halfway measures actually do more harm than good, creating the illusion of progress while maintaining fundamentally unsustainable systems. Blackwell's expression hardened. I understood you were a pragmatist, Ms. Reed, a businesswoman. Surely there's room for incremental improvements. I am a pragmatist, I agreed, which is why I recognize that time for incrementalism has passed. The projects we take on reflect that understanding. As the meeting concluded, cordially but with a definite chill, I felt not disappointment at the lost opportunity, but a quiet satisfaction. There had been a time when I would have bent my principles to accommodate a powerful client, telling myself it was just business, just being realistic. That time was over. That evening, as I prepared to leave the office, Tyler appeared in my doorway again, leaning against the frame with a questioning look. Did you really turn down Blackwell Properties? Their lakeside development is a $50 million project. I really did, I confirmed, gathering my things. They wanted sustainability theater, not the real thing. He shook his head, but I could see the approval behind his exasperation. You've changed. A year ago, I was still finding my footing, I acknowledged. Still proving something. Now I know exactly what Horizon stands for, and I'm not compromising that for anyone, no matter how prestigious their name or how large their budget. We walked to the elevator together, the office quieting as the workday ended. Most of the team had already left to prepare for the award ceremony that evening, a black tie affair where the Carson project would receive its formal recognition. Speaking of the award, Tyler said as we descended, any chance I could persuade you to join a few of us for dinner beforehand? Nothing fancy, just Thai food and moral support before facing all those industry photographers. I hesitated. Since the divorce, I'd kept my social life carefully compartmentalized, professional events when necessary, occasional dinners with Victoria or Eleanor when they insisted, but otherwise, solitude. It had been a deliberate choice, giving myself space to heal and redefine who I was outside of the roles I'd played for so long. But lately, that solitude had begun to feel less like protection and more like limitation. "Actually, that sounds nice," I said, surprising us both. Tyler's smile was warm. "Great. 7 o'clock at Lotus Garden? It's just a few blocks from the venue." As he turned to go, I found myself calling after him. "Tyler." He paused, looking back questioningly. "Why did you leave Greenframe when I did? Your position was secure. Mark valued you." He considered the question seriously before answering. "Because integrity matters to me, in the work and in the people I work with." He shrugged lightly. "Some things are worth more than security." Hours later, dressed in a midnight blue gown I'd chosen specifically for this evening, elegant but distinctive, nothing like the safe, supportive spouse attire I'd worn to Mark's industry events, I stood in the lobby of the Lotus Garden restaurant, waiting for Tyler and the others. The hostess approached with a warm smile. "Your table is ready, Ms. Reed. The rest of your party has already arrived." She led me through the fragrant, bustling restaurant to a private room in the back, where I was surprised to find not just Tyler and a few team members, but nearly 20 people. The core of Horizon's staff, all dressed for the evening's ceremony, rising to greet me with glasses raised. "What's all this?" I asked, genuinely touched by the unexpected gathering. "A proper celebration," Eleanor answered, handing me a glass of champagne. "For the woman who made it all possible." As the evening progressed, delicious food, easy conversation, the awards ceremony where James Carson himself presented us with the sustainability honor, I found myself filled with a profound sense of alignment. This was what success truly felt like, not revenge or vindication, but creation. Building something authentic from the ashes of betrayal, finding my voice after years of supporting someone else's. Later, after the formal photographs and interviews, as the gathering began to disperse, James Carson approached me one last time. "I've been meaning to ask you something," he said, voice lowered for privacy. "The name change. It wasn't just about the divorce, was it?" I looked at him, surprised by his perception. "No, it was about becoming someone new, someone I chose to be, rather than someone shaped by others' expectations." He nodded thoughtfully. "I understand that better than you might think. When I started in this business 30 years ago, I was James Carsonelli from South Philadelphia. The name change came with my first major success, partly to sound more American in a prejudiced industry, partly to mark a transition from who I had been to who I was becoming. I studied him with new interest, seeing beyond the successful developer to the young man who had also reinvented himself. Does anyone from the old days still call you Carsonelli? A smile creased his face. My mother. Only my mother. We shared a moment of understanding, two people who had chosen to redefine themselves, to take control of their own narratives. To new names and second chances, he said, raising his glass in a final toast. To becoming who we choose to be, I answered, completing the sentiment. As I left the ceremony that night, walking through downtown Portland toward the condo I'd purchased in a neighborhood Mark had always dismissed as too edgy, I felt a sense of completion. The circle that had begun with that devastating phone call from Jessica had closed. The woman who had stood shocked in her kitchen, anniversary dinner growing cold, marriage crumbling around her, had transformed completely. Not because of Mark's betrayal, or Jessica's weakness, or even Victoria's opportunity, but because of her own resilience, her own vision, her own refusal to remain defined by loss. Portland's night air carried the scent of spring, cherry blossoms and fresh rain, the promise of renewal. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with possibility. The past was finally, truly past. Olivia Reed looked only forward now, toward horizons entirely of her own making. 2 years after acquiring Greenframe, Horizon Innovations had become the gold standard for sustainable architecture in the Pacific Northwest. Our portfolio had expanded beyond commercial buildings to include affordable housing developments, university research facilities, and even an experimental floating community designed to rise with sea levels, a project that had earned us international recognition. The irony wasn't lost on me that Mark had always dismissed such ambitious concepts as impractical idealism. Under his leadership, Greenframe had chased conventional luxury developments with minimal sustainability features, just enough to earn regulatory approvals and marketing points. Under my direction, Horizon had proven that truly regenerative design could be both profitable and transformative. On a crisp autumn morning, I stood on the observation deck of our newest completed project, a mixed-use development that generated 120% of its energy needs through integrated solar and wind systems, with excess power flowing to the surrounding neighborhood. The rooftop garden where I stood would provide fresh produce for the ground floor restaurant and community food bank. Every element had been designed with both environmental impact and human dignity in mind. "Impressive, isn't it?" Tyler said, joining me at the railing. "The mayor's office called. They want to use this as a model for the new downtown revitalization plan." I smiled, watching a team of students from the local technical college being guided through the building's energy systems by our sustainability director. Education had become a core component of every Horizon project, not just creating sustainable buildings, but teaching others how to replicate and improve upon our methods. "Did you ever imagine we'd get here?" I asked, genuinely curious. Tyler had been with me from the beginning. Leaving Greenframe to join my nascent vision when doing so had seemed like career suicide. He considered the question seriously. "Not specifically this," he admitted, gesturing to the thriving development around us. "But I knew whatever you built would matter. That was enough to take the leap." His simple confidence touched me. Over the past 2 years, Tyler had become more than a trusted colleague. He'd become a friend, perhaps my closest one since Jessica's betrayal had left that position vacant. Our relationship had remained strictly professional, both of us too, focused on building Horizon to complicate matters with personal entanglements, but I'd come to value his perspective and steady presence immeasurably. "We should head back," I said, checking my watch. "The investors' meeting is at 11. As we drove back to Horizon headquarters, I mentally prepared for the meeting ahead. Victoria Hayes had assembled a group of impact investors interested in backing our expansion into California, a significant step that would test our ability to maintain our values while scaling geographically. "Nervous?" Tyler asked as we pulled into the underground parking. "Cautious," I corrected. "Growth is always a double-edged sword. I've seen too many companies compromise their founding principles when expansion happens too quickly." He nodded, understanding. "That won't happen to Horizon." "Not on my watch," I agreed. The confidence in my voice wasn't feigned. 2 years as Olivia Reed had taught me to trust my instincts, to recognize the difference between necessary compromise and dangerous concession. The woman who had spent years subordinating her judgment to her husband's was gone, replaced by someone who knew her worth and wasn't afraid to assert it. The meeting progressed smoothly, Victoria guiding the conversation with her typical precision, while I addressed questions about our design philosophy and implementation strategies. The investors were particularly interested in our employee structure. Horizon had implemented a profit-sharing model that gave every team member a stake in the company's success, from the executive level to maintenance staff. "It's unusual," one investor commented. "Most firms at your growth stage focus on maximizing shareholder returns, not distributing equity so broadly." "Most firms aren't built on the principle that true sustainability includes human well-being," I replied. "We've found that when people have a genuine stake in the outcome, innovation flourishes. Our retention rate is 94%, compared to an industry average of 67%. That stability translates directly to project quality and client satisfaction. By the time the investors departed, expressions satisfied and term sheets preliminarily approved, it was nearly 2 o'clock. I returned to my office to find a package waiting on my desk, a heavy cream envelope with my name embossed in elegant script. "This came while you were out," my assistant explained. "Hand-delivered. The messenger insisted on leaving it directly on your desk." Curious, I opened the envelope to find an invitation to the Governor's Environmental Innovation Awards, where Horizon was being honored for our pioneering work in urban sustainability. The ceremony was black tie, scheduled for the following month at the state capitol. What caught my attention, however, wasn't the invitation itself, but the handwritten note accompanying it. "Olivia, your presence is specifically requested for a special announcement regarding the state's new green building initiative. The governor hopes you will consider taking a leadership role in this important program. Please call my office to discuss details. Camilla Davis, Chief of Staff." I sat back, surprised. The Green Building Initiative had been making headlines for months, a bold plan to transform state-owned properties using cutting-edge sustainable design principles with hundreds of millions in allocated funding. For Horizon to be considered for a leadership role would be a remarkable opportunity and a significant challenge for a company our size. I called Tyler into my office to share the news. "This could be game-changing," he said after reading the note. "State contracts would provide stable, long-term work that could fund our more experimental projects. If we can deliver at that scale without compromising quality," I cautioned. "We can," he said with characteristic certainty. "The team is ready. You've built something extraordinary here, Olivia. It's time to let it grow." The confidence in his voice mirrored what I'd been feeling myself, a readiness to move beyond the constraints of our current position, to expand our impact in ways I couldn't have imagined when Horizon was just a concept born of necessity and determination. Later that evening, as I worked late finalizing presentations for the California expansion, my phone rang with an unfamiliar number. "Olivia Reed," I answered, distracted by the spreadsheet before me. "Ms. Reed, I hope I'm not disturbing you. This is Andrew Mitchell, Mark's father." My fingers froze on the keyboard. In all the tumult of the divorce, the name change, the company acquisition, I'd had no contact with Mark's family. His parents had always been distant figures, wealthy, traditional people who had tolerated rather than embraced me as their son's wife. I'd assumed they'd written me off entirely after the divorce, particularly given the public way Horizon had acquired Greenframe. "Mr. Mitchell?" I managed, unsure what else to say. "I apologize for calling out of the blue," he continued, his voice carrying the refined accent of old East Coast money. "I've been following your work with Horizon. That Riverside restoration project in particular caught my attention. Of all our projects, the Riverside restoration had been the most personal for me. A formerly contaminated industrial site transformed into a mixed-income housing development with extensive habitat. Restoration along the water's edge. It had been financially risky but environmentally vital, the kind of project Mark would never have approved. "Thank you," I said cautiously. "It's a project we're particularly proud of." "As you should be." There was a pause then. "I never had the chance to speak with you after everything that happened. I wanted to tell you that I was sorry for how things ended with Mark and for not being more supportive during your marriage." The unexpected apology left me momentarily speechless. Andrew Mitchell had always seemed cut from the same cloth as his son, polished, ambitious, and fundamentally self-interested. This humility was entirely unexpected. "I appreciate that," I said finally. "But I've made peace with the past. Horizon is my focus now." "And you've built something remarkable," he acknowledged, "which brings me to the reason for my call. I'm serving on the board of the Climate Resilience Foundation, We're looking to fund innovative architectural approaches to sea level adaptation for vulnerable coastal communities. Your floating community design is exactly the kind of thinking we want to support. My mind raced, processing the implications. The Climate Resilience Foundation was one of the most prestigious environmental organizations in the country, with resources that could take our experimental design work to an entirely different level. I'm listening, I said. We're hosting a symposium next month in Boston. I'd like to invite you to present your work and discuss potential funding for expanded implementation. All expenses paid, of course. Once again, I found myself at a crossroads. Working with Mark's father would inevitably stir up memories and associations I'd worked hard to leave behind. Yet the opportunity he was offering aligned perfectly with Horizon's mission and could accelerate our impact significantly. Rebecca might have declined, finding the emotional complexity too difficult to navigate. But Olivia Reed made decisions based on strategic vision, not personal comfort. "Send me the details," I said. "I'd be happy to present our work." After we hung up, I sat in my quiet office, watching Portland's lights glimmer against the night sky. The city that had witnessed my transformation now seemed somehow smaller, a launching point rather than a destination. Boston, California, the state capital. Horizon's reach was extending far beyond what I'd initially imagined. And with it, my own horizons were expanding as well. My phone buzzed with a text from Eleanor. "Word has it you've been invited to lead the Green Building Initiative. Drinks to celebrate?" I smiled, typing back. "And the Climate Resilience Foundation wants us to present in Boston." Double celebration. In order. Eleanor's response came quickly. "Impressive. Rooftop bar in 30? I agreed, gathering my things to leave. As I shut down my computer, a final email notification appeared. A message from Jessica's email address, the first direct communication since her visit to my office over a year ago. The subject line read simply, "Congratulations. Curiosity. One out." I opened it to find a brief message. "Olivia, I saw the feature about Horizon in Architectural Digest. The work you're doing is inspiring. I wanted you to know I'm getting married next month to someone who treats me with the respect you always deserved but never received from Mark. Your courage in rebuilding your life helped me find the strength to demand better for myself. I will always be grateful for that unintended gift. Wishing you continued success, Jessica." I closed the email without responding, feeling neither anger nor warmth, just a distant appreciation for the acknowledgement and a genuine hope that she had indeed found a healthier relationship. Our friendship was irreparably broken, but there was a certain symmetry in knowing that my transformation had somehow catalyzed positive change in her life as well. The rooftop bar where I met Eleanor 30 minutes later offered panoramic views of the city and mountains beyond. As we settled at a corner table with craft cocktails, Eleanor studied me with her characteristic perceptiveness. "You look different tonight," she observed. Something shifted. I considered her words, trying to identify the change she was perceiving. "I think I'm finally looking forward without any reference to the past," I said slowly. "These new opportunities, they have nothing to do with proving anything to Mark or reclaiming what was taken from me. They're purely about what Horizon can become." Eleanor nodded approval. "That's freedom," she said simply. "The final stage of reinvention. When your new identity stands completely on its own, without needing the old one as a reference point." "Is that your professional divorce attorney assessment?" I teased. She laughed. "More my personal experience. I was married too, 20 years to a man who drained every ounce of confidence I possessed. When I finally left him, I spent years defining myself in opposition to that marriage, pushing myself to be everything he said I couldn't be. This was new information. In all our professional interactions and growing friendship, Eleanor had never shared details of her personal history. "When did that change?" I asked. "When I realized I was making choices based on what would have upset him most, rather than what truly fulfilled me. She took a sip of her drink. True freedom came when I could make decisions without mentally calculating his reaction at all, when he became irrelevant to my identity rather than its negative reference point. Her words resonated deeply with my own experience. For the first year after the divorce, after becoming Olivia Reed, I had drawn energy from imagining Mark's reaction to my success, from the knowledge that I was building something better than what he had tried to take from me. But gradually, those thoughts had faded, replaced by genuine excitement about each new project, each new possibility that aligned with my values and vision. To irrelevance, I said, raising my glass, the greatest gift our exes never meant to give us. Eleanor clinked her glass against mine. And to the remarkable women we became without them. As autumn progressed toward winter, preparations for both the governor's ceremony and the Boston Symposium consumed much of my attention. I assembled a small team to develop the presentation for the Climate Resilience Foundation, focusing on our most innovative approaches to designing with water rather than against it. Floating structures, permeable surfaces, living shorelines that could accommodate rising sea levels while enhancing ecosystem health. Meanwhile, discussions with the governor's office progressed rapidly. The Green Building Initiative would begin with a comprehensive assessment of state properties, followed by prioritized retrofitting and new construction. Horizon was being considered to lead the assessment phase and develop the sustainability standards that would guide the entire program, a responsibility that would require expanding our team and potentially opening a satellite office near the state capitol. We'll need to hire at least 15 new people, Tyler said during one planning session. Specialists in energy modeling, materials science, carbon life cycle assessment. And we'll need to develop training programs, I added. We can't just hire experienced people. There aren't enough out there. We need to create them. The challenges were significant, but so was the opportunity to influence how an entire state approached the built environment. If successful, the model could be replicated nationally, creating a ripple effect far beyond what Horizon could achieve through individual projects alone. As the date for the Boston Symposium approached, I found myself increasingly curious about the inevitable meeting with Andrew Mitchell. What would it be like to face Mark's father as Olivia Reed, successful CEO, rather than as Rebecca Morgan, the daughter-in-law who had never quite measured up to family expectations? The thought brought neither anxiety nor anticipation, just a professional interest in this new dimension of my transformed life. 3 days before my scheduled departure for Boston, I received another unexpected call, this one from James Carson, now a close friend as well as Horizon's most prominent client. Olivia, he greeted me warmly. I hope you're sitting down, because I have news that might require bracing yourself. Good news or bad news? I asked, instantly alert. Complicated news, he replied. Arcadia Partners has filed for bankruptcy. I took a moment to process this information. Arcadia, the development firm that had nearly acquired Greenframe before everything fell apart, had been a major player in luxury real estate across the West Coast. Their financial collapse would send shockwaves through the industry. That is surprising, I acknowledged. But how does it affect Horizon? We've never worked with them. No, but they're not the only ones affected. Word has it that Mark's new firm in Chicago is deeply entangled with Arcadia's finances. They've been Arcadia's primary architectural partner on 3 major developments, all now in limbo. The industry gossip suggests his firm might not survive the fallout. I sat back, in my chair, absorbing this unexpected twist. Mark, who had once nearly sold Greenframe to Arcadia against my objections, was now potentially facing professional ruin because of that same company's mismanagement. I'm not sure how to feel about that, I admitted honestly. You don't need to feel anything, James said gently. It's information, not an obligation. I just thought you should know before industry news makes it public. The architectural world is small, and someone is bound to mention it at the Boston Symposium. He was right, of course. Better to be prepared than caught off guard by references to Mark's situation in professional settings. But as I thanked James and ended the call, I realized something significant. The news of Mark's potential business failure had triggered neither satisfaction nor sympathy. I felt the same detached interest I might feel learning about any industry competitor's difficulties. The emotional connection that would have made this news personally meaningful was simply gone. That evening, as I packed for Boston, I came across an old photograph that had somehow migrated from my previous home to my new one, Mark and me at the groundbreaking for Greenframe's first major project, 8 years earlier. I studied our smiling faces, his arm around my shoulders, the hopeful excitement in our expressions. We had been happy then, or what I had understood as happiness. Me supporting his vision, him accepting my support as his due. I had mistaken my usefulness to him for value, my accommodation for love. It had taken devastating betrayal to show me the difference. I slipped the photograph into the shredder without regret. Not out of lingering anger, but because that chapter was truly closed. The woman in that picture no longer existed, and keeping memorabilia of her felt like preserving artifacts from someone else's life. The flight to Boston the following day gave me time to finalize my presentation and reflect on how profoundly my life had changed in just over 2 years. From the devastating discovery of Mark and Jessica's affair to the creation of Horizon, from Rebecca Morgan to Olivia Reed, the journey had been both painful and transformative. As the plane began its descent into Boston Logan Airport, I watched the city spread out below, the historic buildings and modern skyscrapers, the harbor and rivers, all places I had never explored. This trip represented yet another first, another expansion of my reclaimed life beyond the boundaries that had once contained it. Andrew Mitchell was waiting in the terminal, distinguished and straight-backed as ever, his silver hair immaculately styled. He spotted me immediately, despite never having seen me as Olivia Reed. "Ms. Reed," he greeted me formally, extending his hand. "Welcome to Boston. Thank you for making the trip." "Mr. Mitchell?" I replied, shaking his hand firmly. "Thank you for the invitation. I'm looking forward to sharing Horizon's work with the Foundation." As we walked to his waiting car, I noticed him studying me with careful attention. "You look well," he said finally. "Success suits you." "It's not about success," I corrected gently. "It's about alignment, building something that reflects my actual values rather than compromising them for someone else's vision." He absorbed this with a thoughtful nod, a lesson many of us learn too late, if at all. After a pause, he added, "I owe you an apology, you know. When Mark told us about the divorce, I assumed. Well, I made assumptions based on very limited information. It wasn't until I saw what you built with Horizon that I realized how badly I had misjudged the situation. And you?" The frank acknowledgement surprised me. "Thank you for saying that." "It's the least I can do." He hesitated, then continued. "You may have heard that Mark is facing professional difficulties in Chicago." "I did hear something to that effect," I acknowledged neutrally. "His firm may not survive the Arcadia collapse," Andrew said, a note of paternal concern evident despite his composed exterior. "He's been calling us for financial assistance." I said nothing, sensing there was more to this disclosure than simple information sharing. "I declined," Andrew continued after a moment. "Not out of punishment, but because I've realized something watching your trajectory compared to his. Some lessons can only be learned through consequence. My wife and I supported Mark financially and emotionally through too many self-created disasters. We enabled patterns that ultimately harmed him and others, including you." The admission was stunning coming from a man who had always seemed to regard his son as beyond reproach. "That couldn't have been an easy decision," I observed. "No," he agreed, "but necessary. just as your decision to rebuild under a new name was necessary for you. Sometimes the only way forward requires a complete break with old patterns. As the car moved through Boston's historic streets, I felt a peculiar sense of completion. Andrew Mitchell's recognition was not something I had sought or needed, yet it represented the final severance of my connection to my previous life. Mark's father now related to me not as a former daughter-in-law, but as a respected professional, someone whose work he admired independent of any family connection. The symposium itself proved to be a tremendous success. My presentation on adaptive design for rising sea levels generated significant interest, with several Foundation board members approaching afterward to discuss potential implementations in vulnerable coastal communities. By the end of the event, Horizon had secured substantial funding for an expanded floating community prototype, with additional support for educational partnerships to train the next generation of climate-responsive architects. On my final evening, in Boston, Andrew hosted a small dinner for symposium presenters at his club, an old-world establishment with wood-paneled walls and portraits of distinguished members dating back centuries. As we discussed implementation timelines and resource allocation, I caught him watching me with an expression that combined pride and regret in equal measure. "You know," he said when we had a moment alone, "watching you present today reminded me of something I've been missing in my understanding of true leadership. You built Horizon not from a place of ego or competition, but from genuine conviction about what's possible when we design with nature rather than against it." "That's very kind," I said, somewhat uncomfortable with the personal tone. "It's not kindness, it's observation," he corrected. "And it makes me wonder what Greenframe might have become if Mark had recognized your value as more than just support staff for his ambitions, if I had raised him to see collaborative leadership as strength rather than weakness." The comment hung between us, laden with implications neither of us could fully address. In another life, I might have been continuing the Greenframe legacy, alongside Mark, rather than replacing it with Horizon's vision. In another life, Andrew might have been my father-in-law rather than a professional connection linked to a painful past. "We can't rewrite history," I said finally, "but we can learn from it." He nodded, raising his glass in acknowledgement. To learning from history, then, and to Horizon's promising future. As my plane took off from Boston the following morning, I watched the city recede, thinking about the unexpected ways life's paths cross and diverge. 2 years ago, I could never have imagined sitting across from Mark's father as a respected peer rather than a dismissed daughter-in-law. I could never have pictured myself leading a company now poised to influence sustainable design standards across multiple states. I certainly couldn't have envisioned feeling so completely at peace with both my past and my future. My phone buzzed with a text from Tyler. "How did it go?" I typed back. "Beyond expectations. Major funding approved. Tell the team we're expanding the floating community project." His response was immediate. "Celebration when you land. Also, Governor's office called. They want to announce Horizon as lead consultant for the Green Building Initiative at next week's ceremony." I smiled, picturing the team's reaction to this news. What had begun as a desperate act of self-preservation after betrayal had evolved into something far greater than personal vindication, a genuine force for transformation in how we approach the built environment. Horizon was no longer defined by its origins in my broken marriage, but by its vision for a more sustainable, equitable future. As the plane reached cruising altitude, I opened my laptop to review notes from the symposium. Ideas were already forming for how to integrate the Foundation's resources with our existing projects, how to scale our most innovative approaches to meet the needs of vulnerable coastal communities. The work ahead was challenging, but deeply meaningful, exactly the kind of purpose I had been seeking all along, even when I didn't have words to express it. The captain announced our estimated arrival time in Portland, where the team would be waiting, where new projects were developing, where Horizon's headquarters stood as a testament to reinvention. But it was no longer the only place I could imagine myself. Boston, California, coastal communities facing climate change. The world was opening up, offering possibilities that extended far beyond the boundaries of my previous life. I had changed my name to Olivia Reed during the darkest period of my life, creating a new identity as a shield against betrayal and loss. But somewhere along the way, the shield had become a banner. Not just protection, but proclamation of who I truly was, and what I could build when freed from others' limitations. The floating communities we designed were engineered to rise with the tides, turning potential disaster into a new way of living. In the same way, what had begun as my response to personal catastrophe had transformed into a platform for genuine innovation, for work that mattered beyond any individual story of betrayal or redemption. Mark's affair with my closest friend had shattered the life I thought I wanted. But from those fragments, I had built something far stronger, far truer to my actual values and capabilities. Not just a company, but a completely authentic life. One where I no longer needed to define myself in relation to anyone else's expectations or betrayals. As the plane began its descent toward Portland, I closed my laptop and looked out at the mountains and forests below. The landscape seemed to welcome me back, not as someone returning to the scene of past wounds, but as someone coming home to the place where her true self had finally emerged. Olivia Reed was no longer a name I had chosen in desperation. It was who I had become, by choice, by determination, by the gradual accretion of authentic decisions that aligned with my deepest values. The company I had built after my husband's betrayal was now just one expression of that authenticity, significant but not definitive. What defined me now was not what had been done to me, but what I had created afterward. Not the name I had taken, but the meaning I had given it through action and purpose. Not the marriage I had lost, but the vision I had found in its absence. The captain announced our final approach. I gathered my things, ready to step back into the life I had built, a life that expanded daily beyond what betrayal had once seemed to limit, ready to continue the work of creating something meaningful from what I had learned through loss, ready to keep rising with whatever tides might come. 5 years after the acquisition of Greenframe, I stood on the balcony of my Seattle apartment, watching the sunset paint the Puget Sound in shades of amber and gold. The view never failed to center me, especially on evenings like this when significant decisions loomed on the horizon. Horizon Innovations had grown beyond anything I could have imagined when I'd first changed my name and set out to reclaim my professional dignity. What had begun as a personal response to betrayal had evolved into an architectural movement, with offices in Portland, Seattle, San Francisco, and Boston. Our floating community prototype had been featured in international publications as a model for climate adaptation. The Green Building Initiative had transformed state facilities across 3 states, with more adopting our standards each year. My phone buzzed with an incoming call. Tyler, now Horizon's Chief Operations Officer. "The investors just sent over the final term sheet," he said when I answered. "It's exactly what we discussed. They're committed to maintaining our sustainability, standards, and employee ownership model." I exhaled slowly, the weight of the decision settling over me. After months of deliberation, we were considering taking Horizon public, a move that would provide capital for international expansion while allowing us to scale our most innovative approaches to climate-resilient architecture. "What do you think?" I asked, valuing his perspective as I had for years. "I think it's the right move," Tyler said after a thoughtful pause. "We've proven our model works. Going public will let us implement it at a scale that could genuinely shift industry standards. But it's not just about the business, Olivia. It's about you too. Are you ready for this next step?" The question penetrated deeper than Tyler likely intended. Going public would transform not just Horizon but my own life as well. The quiet reinvention I had undergone as Olivia Reed would be thrust into the spotlight. Financial publications would inevitably uncover the story of Greenframe's acquisition, my divorce, the name change. The personal history I had carefully separated from my professional identity would become part of Horizon's origin story, discussed in investor meetings and industry panels. "I need to think about it," I said finally. "Let's talk tomorrow." After we hung up, I remained on the balcony, watching as the last light faded from the sky and the city's illumination took its place. Seattle had become my primary home in the past 2 years as Horizon's operations expanded northward. The distance from Portland, from the city where Rebecca Morgan had lived and worked, where Greenframe had been located, where memories of Mark and Jessica still lingered in specific streets and buildings, had been deliberate, a final step in my transition to a life defined entirely by my own choices rather than reactions to betrayal. My intercom buzzed, interrupting my reflections. The doorman's voice came through clearly. "Ms. Reed, there's an Eleanor Dawson here to see you." I smiled, surprised but pleased. Eleanor and I had maintained our friendship despite the geographical distance, but her visits to Seattle were rare. "Send her up, please." When Eleanor stepped into my apartment moments later, her expression was unreadable, a rare occurrence for a woman whose incisive perceptions had guided me through the most difficult transitions of my life. "I was in the neighborhood," she said, dryly, the obvious falsehood hanging between us. "Portland to Seattle is quite a neighborhood," I replied, gesturing for her to join me on the balcony. "What brings you here unannounced? Not that I'm complaining." Eleanor accepted the glass of wine I offered, taking a moment to appreciate the view before turning to face me directly. "I heard about the IPO discussions." I raised an eyebrow. "News travels fast." "I still represent Horizon legally," she reminded me. "The team preparing the disclosure documents contacted me about historical information." She paused, studying me carefully. "They're going to need the full story, Olivia, all of it." The implication was clear. To go public, Horizon would need to disclose its origins, including the personal elements I had carefully kept separate from my professional narrative. "I know," I acknowledged. "I've been thinking about what that means." "And?" Eleanor prompted, gently. I took a sip of wine, organizing my thoughts. 5 years ago, I would have said no without hesitation. The idea of having my personal history scrutinized, of becoming a story rather than just an architect and CEO, would have been unthinkable. But now it's different, Eleanor finished for me. "Yes," I agreed. "Because I'm different. What happened with Mark and Jessica? It shaped me, but it doesn't define me anymore. Horizon's success isn't about proving them wrong or reclaiming what was taken from me. It's about the work itself, the impact we're having." Eleanor nodded, satisfaction evident in her expression. "That's exactly what I hoped you'd say, which is why I brought this." She reached into her bag and withdrew a thick manila envelope. "The draft disclosure statement for the IPO. I've gone through it carefully. It tells your story with integrity. The professional betrayal, the company acquisition, the transformation of Greenframe's limited vision into Horizon's expansive one. But it focuses on your leadership and innovation, not the personal aspects." I accepted the envelope, feeling its weight literally and figuratively. "And you think it's the right move, taking Horizon public?" Eleanor considered the question with characteristic thoroughness. "I think the question isn't whether it's right for Horizon. The business case is clear. The question is whether it's right for you. Are you ready to step fully into the light, to let Olivia Reed be known not just as a brilliant architect and CEO, but as someone who transformed personal devastation into professional revolution?" Put that way, the answer seemed obvious. The woman who had hidden behind a new name to escape pain had evolved into someone who stood firmly in her own power. someone who had long since moved beyond needing to conceal her origins. "Yes," I said. Simply, "I'm ready." Eleanor smiled, genuine pleasure lighting her features. "Good, because there's something else you should know." She pulled a folded newspaper from her bag, a national business publication I rarely read. Page 6. I opened to the indicated page and found myself looking at a headline that sent a jolt through me. Mitchell Architecture files for bankruptcy. Amid scandal. The article detailed how Mark's Chicago firm had collapsed not just from the Arcadia fallout as rumored years earlier, but from systematic financial mismanagement. Mark himself was being investigated for potentially defrauding investors, with former partners claiming he had misrepresented the firm's financial health to secure funding. The final paragraph mentioned his previous company, Green Frame Designs, now part of the highly successful Horizon Innovations, led by CEO Olivia Reed. "When did this publish?" I asked, my voice steady despite the unexpected news. "3 days ago," Eleanor replied. "I thought you should see it before it potentially comes up in investor discussions. Your story will be contrasted with his, especially once the connection becomes common knowledge." I folded the newspaper carefully, processing this development. Years ago, news of Mark's failure might have brought a sense of vindication, even satisfaction. Now it evoked only a distant pity, not for what had happened to him, but for who he had always been. Someone so focused on appearance that he had sacrificed substance. Someone whose relentless ambition had been untethered from any genuine values. "Poor choices yield poor outcomes," I said finally. Mark always took shortcuts. It was just a matter of time before it caught up with him. Eleanor studied me with approval. No residual anger, no gloating, just clear-eyed assessment. "You really have completed the journey, haven't you?" I smiled, appreciating her perception. "It's been 5 years, Eleanor. Mark feels like someone I read about in a novel once, a character I understood at the time but can barely remember now." We spent the rest of the evening discussing the IPO details, the disclosure requirements, the potential implications for Horizon's future. By the time Eleanor left to catch her late flight back to Portland, we had a clear path forward, one that embraced rather than concealed the full arc of Horizon's origins and my own transformation. The following morning, I woke early and went for a run along Seattle's waterfront, the crisp autumn air clearing my mind as I processed the decisions ahead. The city was just coming alive, morning ferries crossing the Sound, coffee shops opening, their doors, the rhythm of urban life beginning another cycle. I found myself thinking about the woman I had been when this journey began, standing shocked in my kitchen as the anniversary dinner grew cold, my marriage and sense of self crumbling around me. That woman could never have imagined running a company with hundreds of employees, influencing architectural standards across multiple states, considering an IPO that would value Horizon at over $300 million. More importantly, she could never have imagined the internal transformation, the shift from defining myself through others' perceptions to knowing my own worth so securely that external validation became unnecessary. The change from fearing exposure to standing confidently in my full history, neither defined by it nor needing to hide from it. Back at my apartment, I showered and dressed for the day ahead, a video conference with the executive team to discuss the IPO decision. As I prepared my notes, my phone rang with an unfamiliar international number. "Olivia Reed," I answered, tucking the phone against my shoulder. "Ms. Reed, this is Adrienne Fontaine with the International Climate Adaptation Council in Geneva." The voice was crisp, professional, carrying a slight French accent. "I hope I'm not calling at an inconvenient time." "Not at all," I assured her, curious about this unexpected contact. The council was a prestigious organization coordinating global responses to climate change, particularly focusing on vulnerable regions and populations. "Excellent. I'm calling because your work with floating communities and coastal adaptation strategies has come to our attention. We're assembling an architectural advisory committee to develop guidelines for climate-resilient housing in flood-prone regions. We would be honored if you would consider serving as committee chair." The invitation took me by surprise. This wasn't just another project or contract. It was an opportunity to influence global standards, to help shape how communities around the world would adapt to rising seas and intensifying storms. "I'm very interested," I said carefully. "What would the commitment involve?" "The committee will meet quarterly in Geneva, with interim work conducted remotely. The initial appointment is for 2 years, with the first comprehensive guidelines expected to be published for adoption by UN member states at the end of that period." As Adrian outlined the details, I found myself mentally rearranging priorities, considering how this role might align with or complicate Horizon's expansion, plans, and the pending IPO. The timing was challenging but not impossible. More significantly, the opportunity aligned perfectly with the vision that had guided Horizon from its inception, creating built environments that worked with natural systems rather than against them, that prioritized both human and ecological well-being. "I'd like to accept," I said when she concluded her explanation. "Pending some discussion with my executive team about scheduling, of course." "Wonderful," Adrienne responded warmly. "We'll send the formal invitation and details today. The first meeting is scheduled for January in Geneva. We look forward to working with you, Ms. Reed." After we hung up, I sat for a moment, absorbing the implications of this new direction. Geneva, an international advisory role, global influence beyond anything I had envisioned when founding Horizon. The path forward was expanding yet again, opening possibilities that transcended even my most ambitious plans. The video conference with Horizon's executive team began promptly, at 10. Faces appeared on my screen from Portland, San Francisco, and Boston, the leadership team that had grown with our expansion, each bringing unique expertise and shared commitment to our mission. "Before we discuss the IPO decision," I began, "I want to share 2 pieces of news that may factor into our considerations." I outlined both developments, Mark's bankruptcy and legal troubles, and the invitation from the International Climate Adaptation Council. The team listened attentively, expressions thoughtful. "The Mitchell architecture situation is unfortunate, but not surprising," said Amara Chen, our Chief Sustainability Officer. "The question is how it might affect perception of our origin story, if it comes up during the IPO process." "I actually think it strengthens our narrative," Tyler countered. "The contrast between Horizon's trajectory and Mitchell's collapse highlights the difference between our approach and the conventional industry model he represented." The discussion continued, perspectives varying but ultimately converging on agreement that neither development fundamentally altered the business case for going public. If anything, the council appointment enhanced Horizon's global credibility, potentially increasing investor interest. "So we're decided?" I asked finally. "We move forward with the IPO process?" Nods of agreement filled my screen. Tyler spoke for the group. "We're ready. The question is, are you? This will put your personal story in the spotlight in ways we've previously avoided." I smiled, appreciating the concern, but no longer sharing it. "I'm ready. My past isn't something I need to hide anymore. If Horizon's origin story can inspire others facing similar challenges, that's a positive outcome." With the decision made, the meeting shifted to implementation details, timing, disclosure requirements, communication strategy. By the time we concluded, the path forward was clear. Horizon would begin the IPO process immediately, with a target: public offering date in the spring. That evening, I drafted 2 emails. The first went to Adrienne Fontaine, formally accepting the council appointment and requesting details for the January meeting in Geneva. The second, more difficult to compose, went to Andrew Mitchell, a courtesy notification about Horizon's IPO plans and the likelihood that the company's connection to Greenframe would become public knowledge. "Mr. Mitchell, I wanted to inform you directly that Horizon Innovations is preparing for an initial public offering in the spring. As part of this process, the company's history, including its acquisition of Green Frame Designs, will be disclosed in public filings. While the focus will remain on Horizon's professional development and innovative approach to sustainable architecture, I wanted you to be aware that some media coverage may reference my previous connection to your family. I assure you that any such references will be factual and focused on the business aspects of the transition. I've appreciated our professional relationship these past years and the support of the Climate Resilience Foundation for Horizon's coastal adaptation work. Sincerely, Olivia Reed. I hesitated before sending, wondering if the communication was necessary or wise given recent developments with Mark's company. Ultimately, I decided that transparency served all parties best. Andrew Mitchell had evolved from a distant former in-law to a respected professional connection. He deserved the courtesy of direct information rather than reading about it in financial news. His response came the following morning, brief but cordial. Olivia, thank you for the courtesy of this information. I wish Horizon every success with the public offering, which is well-deserved given the company's exceptional work and leadership. Regarding any potential media interest in historical connections, I trust your discretion completely. The contrast between Horizon's trajectory and recent events with Mitchell Architecture speaks for itself without embellishment. My wife and I continue to follow your work with admiration and look forward to seeing how the company evolves in this next chapter. Regards, Andrew. The message carried a tone of respect I would never have expected from Mark's father in the aftermath of our divorce. It underscored how completely the narrative had shifted, not through any vindictive effort on my part, but through the natural consequence of choices made and paths taken. The weeks that followed passed in a blur of preparation, meetings with investment bankers, interviews with financial analysts, detailed reviews of disclosure documents. Horizon's story was distilled into prospectus language, our vision translated, into market positioning, our impact quantified for potential investors. Through it all, I maintained a clear distinction between transparency and sensationalism. Yes, I had founded Horizon after my divorce and the acquisition of my ex-husband's struggling company. Yes, I had changed my name from Rebecca Morgan to Olivia Reed during that transition. These were relevant facts in the company's history. But the focus remained steadfastly on what Horizon had built: innovative approaches to climate adaptation, measurable reductions in carbon footprint, industry-leading, employee retention and satisfaction, consistent financial growth. In early December, just weeks before my scheduled departure for the council meeting in Geneva, I traveled to Portland for the opening of Horizon's newest completed project, an affordable housing development built entirely from carbon sequestering materials with integrated urban agriculture and community-owned renewable energy systems. The ribbon-cutting ceremony drew significant media attention, with sustainability advocates and housing rights organizations hailing the project as a model for equitable urban development. As I spoke about Horizon's approach to integrating environmental and social sustainability, I noticed a familiar figure at the back of the gathered crowd: Jessica, my former friend and my ex-husband's affair partner. Our eyes met briefly during my remarks, her expression unreadable at that distance. I continued without pause, focusing on the project's innovations and the residents who would benefit from them. By the time the formal presentation concluded and I began speaking with individual attendees, Jessica had disappeared from the crowd. Later, as I prepared to leave, a staff member approached with an envelope. "Someone asked me to give this to you," she explained. "They didn't leave a name." Inside was a handwritten note on plain stationery. "Olivia, I almost didn't come today, but I wanted to see firsthand what you've built. It's remarkable, not just the building itself, but what it represents. Genuinely sustainable housing for people who need it most. The kind of project Mark always dismissed as unprofitable. I read about Horizon going public, about the council appointment too. I'm not surprised by your success, only by my failure to recognize your potential when we were friends. I think that's what I regret most, not just the betrayal, but the blindness that preceded it. My therapist says I should stop looking backward, that continued focus on past mistakes prevents genuine growth. She's probably right. But I wanted you to know that your example, the way you transformed devastation into creation, has been a guiding light for me, even from a distance. I wish you continued success and fulfillment. Jessica. I folded the note carefully and slipped it into my pocket, feeling neither the anger that had once consumed me nor the indifference I had cultivated in its place, but something more nuanced, a recognition that all of us are capable of both terrible mistakes and meaningful growth, that the people who harm us continue their own journeys separate from our narratives of them. That evening, I had dinner with Tyler and several Portland team members at a restaurant overlooking the Willamette River. The conversation flowed easily between professional updates and personal anecdotes, the camaraderie built over years of shared purpose evident in every interaction. To Horizon's future, Tyler proposed as dessert arrived, raising his glass in a toast, and to the visionary who made it possible. As glasses clinked around the table, I felt a profound sense of contentment, not just professional pride, but genuine personal fulfillment. The journey that had begun with devastating betrayal had led to a life more authentic and impactful than anything I could have imagined while supporting Mark's limited vision at Greenframe. And to all of you, I added, looking around at the faces of colleagues who had become friends, allies in creating something meaningful. Horizon isn't just my vision, it's what we've built together. Later that night, as I prepared for sleep in my Portland apartment, maintained despite my primary residence in Seattle, a connection to Horizon's origins I hadn't been ready to sever completely, I found myself thinking about the parallels between personal and architectural transformation. The most resilient structures are those designed not to resist change, but to adapt to it. Buildings that flex with earthquakes rather than shattering. Communities that rise with floodwaters rather than drowning beneath them. In the same way, I had survived betrayal not by hardening against it, but by flowing with its force, using its momentum to propel me toward a new configuration of self. The following morning, I woke early and went for a run through the neighborhood where Mark and I had once lived together. The house that had been ours was now occupied by a young family. I could see children's bicycles on the front lawn, colorful, drawings taped to the windows. The life I had expected to build there, the children Mark had always deferred, the memories we never created, had been replaced by someone else's story. Yet as I completed my route and headed back toward downtown, I felt no sense of loss or regret. That house, that life, would have contained me in ways I hadn't recognized at the time. The betrayal that had seemed like an ending had actually been a beginning, painful but necessary, the catalyst for a transformation far more profound than mere recovery. Back at my apartment, I showered and checked email to find the final prospectus for Horizon's IPO awaiting my review. The document was comprehensive, detailing our financial performance, growth strategy, risk factors, and competitive advantages. But what caught my attention was the leadership section, the professional biography that distilled my journey into carefully crafted paragraphs. Olivia Reed, founder and CEO Ms. Reed, founded Horizon Innovations in 2020, following her acquisition of Greenframe Designs, where she had previously served as financial director. Under her leadership, Horizon has pioneered integrated approaches to environmental and social sustainability in architecture, developing industry-leading standards for carbon-neutral construction and climate-adaptive design. Prior to founding Horizon, Ms. Reed, formerly Rebecca Morgan, built expertise in sustainable finance through roles at Greenframe and earlier positions with environmental investment firms. She holds degrees in environmental economics and architectural design from the University of Washington. Ms. Reed was recently appointed chair of the International Climate Adaptation Council's Architectural Advisory Committee and has received numerous awards for her innovative approach to climate-resilient design. The simplicity of those paragraphs belied the complexity of the journey they summarized: the pain and determination, the fear and courage, the loss and discovery that had shaped each step. Yet their straightforward presentation felt right, neither dramatic nor evasive, just factual acknowledgement of the path that had led to this moment. I approved the document without changes and sent it back to the legal team for final filing. The decision felt monumental, yet somehow also ordinary. Another step forward on a journey that continued to unfold in ways I could never have predicted at its beginning. That afternoon, I met with Horizon's Portland leadership team to discuss the transition plan for my upcoming Geneva commitments. The role would require significant time in Europe, necessitating adjustments to our operational structure. "We've been anticipating this," Tyler assured me. "The regional directors are ready to take on more autonomous leadership. Video conferencing can handle the rest. Horizon will thrive while you're helping shape global adaptation standards." His confidence wasn't just supportive rhetoric. It reflected the reality of what we had built together. Horizon had evolved from my personal vision into a resilient organization with distributed leadership and shared purpose. It would continue to flourish regardless of my physical presence, just as I would continue to grow through new challenges and opportunities. As the meeting concluded, Tyler lingered behind as the others filed out. "I've been meaning to ask you something," he said once we were alone. "The IPO, the council appointment, these are both significant transitions. How are you feeling about it all?" The question was typical of Tyler, direct yet thoughtful, focused on the human element beneath the professional developments. In the 5 years we had worked together, he had become my most trusted colleague, and though our relationship had remained strictly professional, there was a depth of understanding between us that transcended conventional workplace boundaries. "I'm ready," I said honestly. When I started Horizon, when I became Olivia Reed, it was about reclaiming what had been taken from me: my professional standing, my sense of self-worth, my vision for truly sustainable design. But somewhere along the way, it became about something much larger. The IPO, the council role, they're not about me anymore. They're about expanding the impact of what we've built together. Tyler nodded, satisfaction evident in his expression. "That's exactly what I hoped you'd say. You've completed the journey from reaction to creation, from rebuilding after betrayal to building something entirely new." His assessment resonated deeply. The woman who had changed her name to escape pain had evolved into someone who stood firmly in that name, someone whose identity was defined not by what had been done to her, but by what she had created in response. As I packed that evening for my return to Seattle, preparing for the Geneva trip just weeks away and the IPO launch beyond that, I found myself contemplating the full arc of the journey. From the devastating discovery of Mark and Jessica's affair to the creation of Horizon, from the acquisition of Greenframe to the upcoming public offering, from Rebecca Morgan to Olivia Reed, every step had contributed to a transformation more profound than simply recovering from betrayal. I had not merely survived the collapse of my marriage and professional identity. I had alchemized that loss into something of genuine value. A company that was changing how we build and inhabit our world, a self defined by authentic purpose. Rather than reflections in others' eyes, a life that continued to expand into new territories of possibility and impact. The final piece of my packing was a small framed photograph, not of my former life, but of Horizon's first completed project. The image showed not just the building itself, but the team that had created it, faces alight with the satisfaction of meaningful creation. I had carried this photograph to each new office, each new home, as a reminder not of where I had begun, but of what I had built from those beginnings. As I slipped it carefully between layers of clothing, I thought about the nature of true resilience. Not the capacity to endure unchanged, but the ability to transform challenge into opportunity, pain into purpose, endings into beginnings. Mark's betrayal had not destroyed me but revealed me, the strength, vision, and capability that had always existed beneath the supportive wife, the competent financial director, the woman who had made herself smaller to fit within someone else's. Limited imagination. Olivia Reed was not a disguise I had adopted to escape that past, but the authentic self I had discovered through its dissolution. The name change that had begun as protection had become proclamation of autonomy, of vision, of the truth that sometimes we must lose an identity to discover who we truly are. As I closed my suitcase, my phone buzzed with a final email for the day, confirmation of my Geneva arrangements, including a preliminary agenda for the council meeting. The scope of topics was ambitious, developing architectural standards for regions facing sea level rise, creating implementation pathways for vulnerable communities, integrating indigenous knowledge with technological innovation and climate adaptation. This work, global, collaborative, focused on those most affected by climate disruption, represented yet another expansion of the purpose that had emerged from personal crisis. What had begun as reclamation had evolved into creation, and now, into contribution on a scale I could never have envisioned when standing shocked in my kitchen as my marriage collapsed around me. I set my alarm for an early flight and turned out the light, ready not just for sleep, but for whatever challenges and opportunities awaited in Geneva, in the public markets, in the continuing evolution of Horizon Innovations and Olivia Reed, no longer defined by reaction to betrayal, but by authentic vision for a more sustainable, equitable future. The darkness outside my window was complete, but I could sense dawn approaching. Another beginning, another opportunity to create something meaningful from the raw materials of experience. Another day in a life that had transcended its painful catalyst to become something genuine and purposeful on its own terms. I closed my eyes, at peace with both where I had been and where I was going. The journey that had begun with betrayal had no fixed destination, only continuing growth, expanding impact, and the profound satisfaction of living authentically in a name and purpose entirely my own. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories. Right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.